Well, Supreme Court showdown looming over in Washington, the highest court in the land, gearing up to weigh in on the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Let's bring in Yahoo Finance's legal correspondent, Alexis Keenan. And Alexis, this is a little unusual in that there's still a lot of cases in the lower court. This isn't one that's necessarily made its way up. But what exactly is the Supreme Court weighing in on?
Right. So I guess one way to look at it would be that this is not a case that is making it to the Supreme Court in the most natural way. So tomorrow's hearing is really a rare move for the court and all of the justices to hear oral arguments on what is essentially an emergency application to consider the Biden administration's vaccination mandates. For one, certain healthcare workers, and two, large business employers. Now, if you remember back in November, the administration issued requirements for employers that have either 100 or more workers and also healthcare employers that get Medicare and Medicaid funding to have their workers vaccinated. And there was an option just for those large businesses to adopt a weekly testing option if they chose. Now, the deadline has already passed. It was January 4th. The administration has said it will not in the meantime, at least until December 10th, enforce that mandate. But these rules really gave rise to a bevy of lawsuits that you mentioned from Republican-led states as well as business groups. And they were arguing that the federal government really lacks the legal authority to direct private businesses to require vaccination. So those suits then generated conflicting rulings from different courts, both okaying and halting enforcement of these rules. So tomorrow's hearing is going to address a very narrow issue. The justices are going to look only at whether the mandates, if they remain halted pending litigation, if they should, in fact, remain halted pending these lawsuits that are going on across the country at lower courts at different levels. Now, both in the lower courts and there will be an eventual decision on the full merits of this case. But tomorrow's hearing is not for that. It's just to say, do we hold these requirements and not enforce them until all of the cards are out on the table and the final decision is made on whether this is essentially legal, or is it the Biden administration over-exercising its authority, using authority that these litigants say the president and none of these federal agencies have under the Constitution and has not been delegated by Congress. So the key question these justices are going to ask is whether the parties that are moving for the stays, these halts on the enforcement, whether they will succeed on the ultimate merits of the case. So that's what they're looking at. And a lot of eyes on this. The penalties are very, very steep for noncompliance for employers and for healthcare employers as well. So this will impact a large number of U.S. workers and employers. We're looking at collectively about 100 million U.S. workers that are impacted by this eventual decision. Akiko?
Yeah, and Alexis, I mean, I remember talking about this kind of earlier on. Obviously, legally, there are questions around how the government was going to try and impose their vaccine mandates. But I remember chatting with you about historical precedent and Supreme Court rules before around why it seemed like they were in strong standing to do this. I mean, how would you kind of guess some of these questions will be answered as we move forward?
You know, it's really hard to say. This is certainly a case of first impression. Now, courts have been in wide agreement across the country that private employers, they can make whatever mandates they see fit for their own businesses. And the crux of the matter here is whether the federal government can step in and say, you have to do this. We've seen so many large employers already across the country anticipating these rules and going ahead and doing it anyway. And they certainly have the right to do so. But whether or not the administration has overstepped its authority here and essentially telling OSHA on one hand and the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services on the other that they have to do this, that these employers under those authorities have to do it, that's the key question. Can the federal government step in here and tell these private employers what to do? Probably a better argument perhaps on the Medicare and Medicaid side, because healthcare facilities that are accepting those funds are getting federal funds. As for larger employers that are not receiving any federal funds at all, that's maybe a larger question there.
And those arguments set to begin tomorrow. We can watch for Alexis's coverage on Yahoo Finance. Thanks so much for that.